Thanks a lot for coming. I thought with resurrection science, it's a kind of the season for people to talk about resurrection. Why not talk about it a little bit in our church here too? So, in a shameless attempt to fill the seats, I announced this topic, and like I say, I don't know if it helped or hurt. I hope that brings a lot of ideas to you when you think about that topic. That can be some aspect of thoughts about resurrection science, and of course you can start getting into, oh come on, you worked earlier.
Do you want me to do something back there?
I don't know, it was all working, I tested it out, and I walked away, and now it's...
Should have walked away.
There. Did you hit something?
Yeah, I clicked the button.
Okay. He didn't want to show up for a while. 3 days late. So it could be that. That could be some ideas. What's the scientific knowledge supporting the afterlife? Okay. And then again, the cycle of seasons that provide us with cute little animal friends that hang with us and spend time. Let her go for the cute pictures there. And finally, another one, the water cycle, and what goes on is the water cycle and its place in nature for us too. But you may have a little bit more intensely scientific view, and then you'd might talk about. You can't leave out zombies if you're going to talk about returning to life and coming back and so on. And some people even combine the zombies with some of the other earlier ones. And Easter can be a zombie Christian thing. Okay. The more scientific view, there's talk about regeneration and building of organs and skin. Now, there was just a very interesting scientific discussion about, presentation about the fact that they're able to now generate technologies and techniques that aid in the regeneration of skin and other organs with a better capacity to fight rejection. Some of that has to do with the fact that now they can take all different types of cells and make embryonic stem cells out of all different cells of the body, and we'll talk about a little bit more of that later. But basically you can make a 3D printing almost, or they're working towards doing this 3D printing of people's own kidneys based on their own cells, so you can regenerate kidneys. My father was 98 years old, and he was sending messages out to his doctors when he saw something in Scientific American about regenerating kidneys because of his kidney disease. He figured if they get that straightened out and give him a new kidney, he was probably good for another 50 years, and I think he might have been too. So, fighting rejection after transplants is a big thing in science and resurrection. And on the right is an example of in vitro fertilization, another aspect of bringing things out that resurrection, new life, and so on. And in terms of in vitro fertilization, it's pretty interesting. Go ahead. Melissa Etheridge, she just announced, and this is pretty interesting. She just announced, she revealed to her teenage children that she and her partner decided and became pregnant. She became pregnant 14, 15 years ago or so. She had offers from both David Crosby and Brad Pitt. And that's maybe the benefit of being a famous rock singer. They both offered to donate their sperm to the cause. Her children, oddly, were really disappointed because she just revealed to her children that Melissa Etheridge chose David Crosby. She was going for the musical talent, I guess, rather than the hunk portion. And they had some amazingly unscientific responses to that. They said, oh man, we could have been Brad Pitt's child, right? We could have had Brad Pitt's genomic structure inside of us. No, you couldn't, because then you wouldn't be who you are, right? Someone else. Yeah, you can't have Brad Pitt's genomic structure in you, kids, right? I mean, so it's pretty interesting that they could not have that structure, but they wished that they could have, and they didn't, and they'd rather be not around, apparently, and have someone else have Brad Pitt's and Melissa Etheridge's genomic structure in them, and that would have made them happier. So, anyways, so what I really want to, I just was kind of freebasing with some of the different topics that could come up with resurrection science out of all that. So those are some of the fun ideas that I came up with out of it. What I really want to start with when I bring up the topic of resurrection science is none of those, or really maybe a little bit of each of those. And I want to introduce you to an animal that found an existence on 5 acres of land in the whole world. Nowhere else, no place else. In the Kihansi Gorge, it ought to click, in Tanzania, excuse me. Kihansi Gorge, you can see down there in the bottom right. That's about a day-and-a-half journey from Dar es Salaam, which is the large city there on the Indian Ocean. You can kind of get a sense. I wanted to get close in to show you where it was. The Indian Ocean is here. It's the eastern coast of Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique over here. And most of Africa around over here to the south, South Africa down here and so on. I think you got a pretty good sense of where that is. But this could be a day and a half trip over dirt roads and very tough driving, a few hundred miles to get to this very remote area. They call this area, there's a mountainous area in here, and they call it the Galapagos of Africa. There's very much isolated areas and a lot of evolutionary evidence of things going on there. So it's a pretty interesting area. Only there, in 5 acres of land. In the late 90s, a World Bank project started to bring electrification to this remote area. It was going to provide something like 40% of the electricity of all of Tanzania. It actually has something like the size of Texas and Oklahoma together in square mileage, but it provides less energy. It provided less energy in 1996 than North Korea does. So very, very low capacity. Which brings the question, are people poor because they have no power? Or do people have no power because they're poor? There's kind of this kind of juxtaposition of what comes first. So a World Bank project came in, and you can see it's in high production here. It took about 8 years to make, and they had done a very poor environmental impact survey at the beginning of it. In fact, it was like a graduate student came out and showed pictures of animals and so on to people in the area, and they said, yeah, we've seen those, but didn't ever ask about animals that had never been seen anywhere else. So in fairly short order, when they started building the dam, they started finding some interesting things going on there. 90% of the water all the water came off and it went into this gorge area type of thing. Just amazing thing. The sound of this water going over, it's 800 meters, 2,400 feet drop. The sound is reckoned close to like the sound of a rock concert. It's so loud that it's deafening sound there. So it's pretty amazing what goes on, the amount of water flowing over there. But 90% of that water now, that used to travel this natural path, now goes down through vertical tunnels dug right down through the earth and goes down to turn turbines and make electrical power that goes out to Tanzania and around the area. Okay. So that's kind of the environment that this animal lived in. It was the Kihansi spray toad. The adult the size, it could sit comfortably on a dime, to give you an aspect of size of that thing. Very small. No one had noticed it. The area there, the water is so heavy, it comes down so heavily that trees are essentially drowned all in that area for hundreds of yards on either side of this gorge. So it's a very open, meadowy kind of place, very wet and moist and verdant, and it's very well suited for this kind of creature. It has no visible way of hearing. It has no external structures. Of course, you don't want to hear a rock concert your whole life. It's another evidence of evolution going on, right? Adaptation to things. So it does have the capacity to hear ultrasonic noise, which allows it to communicate even with this deafening noise that it doesn't really attend to. It hears ultrasonic noises. It can communicate and find its other animals of its species. It can hear the buzzing of bees and animals that it wants to feed upon. The other really interesting evolutionary adaptation on it, you can imagine if this guy is the size to sit on a dime comfortably, that's a pretty small baby there, right? It can actually fit on the head of a pin. And these creatures, because if they laid eggs, like most amphibians do, the eggs would get washed down the gorge in this fast-running water. It bears live young. So another really amazing evolutionary adaptation, too. Okay. What's that?
Amphibians aren't supposed to do that.
Right. It didn't know that. So, let me see. I think I talked most about what I wanted to say about some of the things about it. Sunshine and open and very noisy.
So Mike, now that the dam was built, or is being built, is that entire environment, ecosystem destroyed?
Yeah, I mean, basically, they had a very poor environmental impact study done originally. Then the World Bank, when it was spending the money and the contributors, they insisted that a better environmental inspection got done. And at that time, in fairly short order, they found this frog, or this toad. And when they found this toad, everybody said, this changes quite a bit. Actually, these are probably the most expensive toads in the world because it started a scheme of events that I'll describe some of that just went down amazing paths. All right, you remember maybe the snail darter in the States near Tennessee River, I think it was, when they were building a dam there, and then they found this snail darter, and they had to try to reposition it to another river and so on. Well, that's this story in spades. This goes really on from there. So when the dam was built, the project was essentially underway when these toads were discovered in 1996. No one knew about these toads until 1996. These are all just different interesting pictures of them. The female and the male is generally half the size of the female, and they're reproducing there, which is good for the toads. This, and I think we'll probably hold off a bit, this is one of the things that they decided to do. They did two, they basically, the scientists that found this animal said, this is going to be tough on this animal. 5 acres of land, this land, it's going to all be gone because of the dam, everything's changed. The one thing they did, and you can see, they started building actually an artificial spray system to try to reproduce the environment that the toads were able to survive in. Okay. Unfortunately, when they brought that, when they came in with things like that, they built that and they got this spray system up and going, reproducing as best they could the environment that they were living in. They also brought in, workers brought in, on their boots probably, spores that developed into the chytrid fungus, which is a fungus that's basically decimated the amphibian population around the world. So this was brought in, this fungus. The fungus essentially grows on their skin. It doesn't really kill them, but what it does is it hardens their skin so much, and amphibians breathe essentially through their skin. They get sodium, potassium, oxygen, all these different elements come into their bodies through their skin, and it essentially stops their heart from beating. They can't live because they can't pass through their system, get into their system, the elements and the things that they need to survive. So there was the effort and the emphasis put on trying to resurrect this animal, trying to bring it in, and part of it had failings as well. They also took 500 of these toads and flew them to the United States. And there are colonies of them in the Bronx Zoo in New York and the Dayton Zoo in Ohio. And those things, the population of those plummeted for a while, because there's a lot to learn about any creature, how it survives and what it needs to breed and eat, and you know, what is essential for its life. And so there were immense amounts of time spent by people trying to get an environment that these animals could live in, right, and how they could survive and thrive. And basically both came up with some solutions, came up with some answers of how to do it, and both populations are still going. Of the animals that remained in the Cahansi Gorge after the dam came in, and the artificial spraying, and then the fungus that came in as part of that, basically within 5 years they were extinct in the wild. So this whole idea of building this gorge made them extinct. So now what is going on now is they're seeding this gorge again, now that they think they've solved a lot of these other problems, and they bring these animals that have gone through 20 or 30 generations maybe of more creatures coming back, and they're putting them back into this system to try to make them survive and live back in the wild again. Okay? So that starts the ethical dilemmas, I think, right? Or continues them. Click. Think of the costs involved in all this. The studies that were done, the spray system that was developed and built, the time spent to do that, to cart all this material many miles from Dar es Salaam, and to bring in the experts on how to build these things. Then they collected these spray toads, they studied them, and they brought them back to Toledo and the Bronx, and they studied them, how to make them thrive, how they can get them to reproduce and live. All the different adaptations and the changes to the dam project to try to maintain enough of the gorge so that the animals could live there and so on. And so the couple ethical questions I wanted to talk about was, is it worth paying all that money for some tiny amphibians called spray toads when thousands of Tanzanians under 5 years old and pregnant mothers and senior citizens are all dying of want in that country? And is that the balance that you have to decide? The one I asked earlier, do people in Tanzania lack power, meaning electricity in this case, because they are poor, or are they poor because they lack power? Is this something that giving them power and making this project is a good thing in some ways too? And as we go on, this is each of these animals. This animal lives in 5 acres of land. Well, you know, what makes the world better or worse? These are all very tough questions for me. And I'm not here to try to give answers. I wanted to kind of seed the idea and start some thoughts about it too. When you talk about a species, there's species that people are trying to save. There's a lot of effort being put into the northern white rhinoceros right now. It's essentially extinct in the wild. There's a southern white rhinoceros that's doing pretty well. And there are differences if you look very subtly. Do we just need to see a rhinoceros or know that some kind of rhinoceros is out there in the wild? Or do we have to develop and say, well, this is one species and it's significantly different than this species, so we have to start saving both species and so on too. And what do you do in all this? The challenge that we're facing is that this is a world that's growing in terms of the human population and our impact on it, right? And because we're making these impacts, are we then responsible for these creatures and their well-being too? So when you start thinking about a species, I think sometimes, I've said it a few times before in here, but a species is sometimes looked at with our old Western Platonic way of looking at a species. If you look at a horse or a rabbit, everyone knows what that is. And Plato says there's an ideal of a rabbit, right? And we all know what a rabbit is. But actually, there's hundreds of different subspecies and different types of rabbits. If you look at, based on how they evaluate species, there's said to be something like 140 possible species of the bird of paradise in New Zealand alone, in the islands around New Zealand. 140. Does that mean each one is essentially different in some scientific way? So this brought together a lot of thoughts. You know, how do we make this world, and how do we make a scientific world safe for creatures? How do we do all this? And yeah, I thought we can come through a couple of these other animals that have this. This is the Florida panther. It's a different subspecies than the Texas panther. Very endangered in the Everglades. It's very rare to see one. But people do once in a while. There's just a video, and I recommend you seeing it. It was just on, a woman was walking along one of those pathways, wooden pathways, a boardwalk through the Florida Everglades, and she had her camera on, and she heard this skittering noise, and one of these guys came tearing right past her. And it's all caught on video, so you could YouTube that and catch it and see it. It's pretty amazing. It's just like 14 seconds, and it ends with a profanity, but she was pretty amazed. This is the white sands pupfish, found in Arizona. In 4 places, it turns out, with a lot of study. Again, two of those places were found to be where ranchers and farmers had relocated these guys, colonies of them, in the late 1800s. This fish can live in salinity that's 3 times as salty as an ocean, as an average ocean salinity. So they've developed this evolutionary capacity, right, that allows them to live in the desert areas where the water congregates, the salt in the water congregates there. And different areas, different fish in different areas are adaptable to different salinities. But very interesting fish there too. This is a Hawaiian crow, an alala, which extinct in the wild. The last egg was nurtured by this woman, who then it hatched, and it's become the genomic donator of its genetic structure, of its chromosomal information, to almost all the existing alalas that are around now. These guys were very social. There's a great story about these two. They were kind of symbolic, religious symbols for the Hawaiian people. Very social. They interacted well together. They were so strong as a group that they could scare off or intimidate the eagles and the hawks that are in Hawaii. So these guys would work together to save their space. And once they were extinct in the wild and then resurrected and brought back, they have completely different social habits now. They have the same genomic structure, but they didn't have the information passed on from parent to child because of their social structure. There was a lot of information. They taught their young how to group together to fight off these hawks and eagles. They said for about 3 or 4 years, the hawks and eagles would see these crows come together, and they'd start flying away because they knew that they were going to get pestered. And it took about 3 or 4 years for the hawks and eagles to realize that they had lost that trait because it wasn't passed on, and it wasn't in their chromosomal structure. It was passed on socially, how to interact to keep the eagles away from your feeding areas and so on. So there's things that change. Just because you resurrected something doesn't mean it's the same thing as it used to be. There's other things that are lost. The northern white rhinoceros here, again, subtle things. They say it carries its head higher, and it has a bigger hump back here, and both of those help it see in the higher grass of the northern African savannas than the southern white rhinoceros. Okay. to all of us, I wouldn't know the difference, but scientists see the difference in these subspecies. So the northern white rhinoceros has been just decimated by all the fighting in the Congo and all these regions, the Lord's army that came down, just all this interaction, and poaching was big because you could buy so many guns. The horn is very popular in the Far East. Some of you may know it's used as a potency, supposedly, pill, powder. That it's probably about 5 times more valuable than gold. That horn in the Far East, crushed into powder and put into little pills. So that's what's funding a lot of the guns and violence going on in the Congo. And this one, anyone identify that? Passenger pigeon. There's stories, 1871 was the biggest nesting recorded in Wisconsin. 850 square miles were being nested in at one time by one flock of these passenger pigeons. They would land in trees in the millions. Even though they're a light animal, supposedly oak trees, branches would crumble under the weight of all the passenger pigeons that landed in them. And they were, farmers hated them because they'd come and they'd go through their fields and eat all the young crops and so on too. But caught and netted and shot in a lot of different ways, killed and died off.
People loved eating them. They were a delicacy.
Yeah, like a squab or something like that, right? There's a group of people headquartered in California right now that are looking at, with some of the things that are being done, they can actually take cells from existing passenger pigeons that are in museums, and you can get from the cell, you can create, which was devised in the late 90s, I believe, the capacity to develop stem cells. You know, it used to be the embryonic stem cell debate went on and so on, and a researcher in Japan developed how to take almost any cell and make it into stem cells. So the concept is you could take the stem cells from the passenger pigeon, or take the skin cells, make it into stem cells. The stem cells could then be made into eggs and sperm, and you could recombinate them, put them in with other existing kinds of pigeons, and you could get the genomic structure going again of a passenger pigeon. And what's the ethics of that? Is it something that goes on from there? You think of, if we know that we can do this to animals and say, well, we can always bring them back. There's people that say, I guess we don't have to worry so much about saving them because we always have their genes and we can bring them back. But like in the alala, the Hawaiian crow, you don't really save everything there. Mm-hmm.
You mean that the passenger pigeon has disappeared and no zoos, nothing has ever kept any?
Right, the last one died, I believe, in 1938 or something like that.
You mean zoos never had any?
They had some, but they died as well too. They weren't successful in breeding them in captivity.
They were so common, this was before a lot of wildlife conservation became, a recognized discipline, or a valuable discipline. And passenger pigeons were so common in the 1800s, early 1900s, so that they disappeared in some sense without notice.
It's almost incomprehensible to think that there was I read a report about an explorer in the 1700s. He was in the Midwest, what we call the Midwest now, the West for him. And he said that a flock, you can't even really call it a flock, passenger pigeons flew over, and it was 5 or 6 hours of time for them to all pass over.
regarded as pests like locusts.
Right. Farmers would sit by their fields with shotguns to try to get rid of them and so on. Yeah.
And locusts, you don't want those.
Right. Right.
And that's essentially what the role they took.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And so then there's aspects of, if you bring it back, there's an amazing debate, what that means. Some people felt like the only reason it could live it can only live if it lives in large numbers. Something about its size of its flocks are important to its survival. So does that mean it comes back to that point, and then you know?
Alfred Hitchcock.
I thought of Alfred Hitchcock a few times, and you know, then it goes on not just to that. This is opening up a whole brave new world in many ways. You know, people are talking about bringing back mastodons, right? Things from other eras. And Jurassic Park, you know. Jurassic Park is actually pretty unscience-y, although it's a good read, and it has some interesting ethical questions in it too. But, you know, there's another topic too, and maybe, Scott, can you get to the last? It's actually potentially scientifically possible to work at bringing back Neanderthals. My wife thinks there's at least one Neanderthal extant in the world right now.
They try to elect you.
So, anyways, some of those questions, and we moved away. I think the interesting part of that whole Cahansi spray toad, I tried to bring it out to you in a way that you could use some of those ideas in a topic. But what I thought I'd like to do is to try to get in a group and be able to talk about some of these ethical questions about it more. What is the ethics of the resurrection of creatures, and what does it mean, and what does it do? Do we have to take care of them as much as we thought we had to now that they're around and available? There's ways available to do it. There's actually in San Diego and in numerous other places in New York, there are frozen zoos, basically, where they're taking samples of all sorts of critters, all types of animals, and bringing them around and saving examples of their genomic structure in nitrogen, in liquid nitrogen, so that you can catalog it and bring them out whenever you want, and you can do all this. We don't know exactly what the benefits of all of it are, you know, but there's people spending a lot of time doing all this.
Right, this is also true in horticulture. I mean, look at all the seeds that we're losing, all the variety.
Right.
It's like dwindling down, so there are banks of seed banks, hopefully they are there.
Right.
Which we may need someday.
Right.
When the existing plants don't want to grow anymore.
Right. Well, when Vicki Nowicki was here, her husband Ron talked a month ago from the land office about saving the planet and so on, and then she talked about that you can go, I know, to the St. Charles Library and you can check out seeds, and you can do that in some of the other libraries around here too. You know, so that's a small thing, but heirloom creatures, different kinds of animals. You know, part of the benefit of modern day agriculture is that you can get high volumes, but then to do that, they want to force one type of resistant, fast growing, all these different supposedly positive qualities onto plants, and there isn't the variety. It's a monoculture of types of plants and animals too. You know, that's the issue about the northern and the southerners. There's something about the white rhinos that it's important to keep some aspects of each of them. So,
Do you know something about, and this is just coming back in the back of my brain, so I'm not sure I'm repeating this correctly, but do you know something about the theory that's floating around about human genes? That the question was asked by scientists, you know, if we reproduce from two parents, why doesn't that reproduction process eliminate bad genes? And the idea, as I understand it, is because, you know, we might need those bad genes sometime. They might actually end up in the long run being good genes, but we don't know yet. Do you know about that?
well, I know that, for example, sickle cell anemia, which seems like a terrible thing to have, is actually a benefit in malarial areas. So that's why it's commonly found in black people in that are
Tropical.
in tropical areas, yeah. And that it actually, and it's been a while since I read it, but it actually allows the transmittal when you have one parent that has it and one parent that doesn't. It has no impact on you, and it mitigates the problems associated with malaria. So we call things as bad genes or good genes because we're maybe arrogant and...
It's only in our moment that they might seem bad.
Right, if you look at it...
Centuries down the road.
In an evolutionary cycle, yeah. So something may seem to have some bad impact, but if it had no good impact, evolutionary theory says it wouldn't be around at all. There's tie-ins with things being on the same chromosomes and stuff like that, so, again, like hemophilia in the British ruling line and so on, it seemed like a terrible thing, but it was on the chromosomes that allowed for that to happen more easily.
One of the interesting things you could come as that example is that if they could figure out a way to inoculate people so that you couldn't get malaria, a different scientific approach than the sickle cell anemia would probably just be plain bad because it could shorten people's lives. So there are other ways, that you can get by that through science in order to extend people's lives, both in terms of not getting malaria, which is what Bill Gates is trying to solve, as well as getting rid of the sickle cell anemia. But the answer is you can't predict the future. It's like when you get down to a single kind of a plant and some fungus gets it, then the whole thing is wiped out automatically. So diversity is still a great value. So.
Right, the value of diversity is sometimes forgotten in the chase for money, right? So, diverse things don't have the optimum, right? But diversity gives you strength.
But science can change the answer. Sickle cell anemia had some benefits. You find another way of solving that problem, and you can basically cure both without having to.
Mm-hmm.
And you maintain the gene.
Pardon?
You maintain the gene by inoculating for the disease.
You may do what to the gene? I didn't.
You maintain the gene.
You maintain the gene.
But if you could then get rid of sickle cell anemia too, then you'd solve both problems. If you could inoculate one and somehow with the other. So.
But again, I think you're still working from limited understanding. You think that you've done this wonderful thing, but we've seen ripple effects before, right? I mean, politically.
There's an interesting story. I think it's called the book 1493, the Columbian Exposition. Same guy who wrote the predecessor book about the world before Columbus. The reason I bring it up is because he talks about how the impact of malaria and malaria resistance among slave populations hugely impacted the way that the Caribbean, which was far more important in the 1700s and 1600s, phenomenally impacted the way that that part of the world was developed by Europeans. For just a simple example, Caucasian Europeans would tend to put their houses up on top of any available mountain because mosquitoes were less prominent up there. And if the Caucasian people went down into the valleys, like to oversee the workers and whatnot, they were more likely to catch malaria. So it had all kinds of impacts on the way the human culture and some of the racist tendencies evolved just because of this disease and the way it exhibited itself in different populations. So a lot of these questions, not just about malaria and sickle cell, but they have spider webs of connectivity that we often don't even know about. And that's one of the concerns about bringing back some of these other species, like the mastodon or even the pigeon, is what else in the environment will change potentially quite drastically in response to that.
They all have their niche, and once they've given up a niche, generally something will move into that niche, right?
Yeah, I heard an environmental lecture recently where the speaker said, no matter what humans do, no matter how badly we decimate the earth, nature will be fine. Don't worry about nature. Nature will take care of itself. We might have a hell of a time, but nature's going to be fine. So, I mean, ultimately, the question is a selfish one, isn't it? You know, I mean, how badly do we want to tear this stuff apart before it kicks us in the butt?
Right,
Or kicks us worse than it already has? That's really the question, because we don't have to worry about saving the earth. The earth will be fine.
Well,
Well, it's be there, and it's gonna do what it's gonna do. We might have an awful time.
yeah, I mean, I tend to maybe rebel about that a little bit in terms of I think we can do some damages that force natural flows to not go properly and have to
But see,
really
that
adapt.
properly is a subjective judgment. That's us saying proper. What is proper?
You could have extinction of all species. You don't know that. You don't know that.
Well,
If the atmosphere changed.
But even if you don't, let's say that 94%, I mean, of species become extinct. That's a change to the earth that we caused that I'm not proud of, that we have the capacity to do it.
Sure.
I don't think nature will be fine is the way I'd say what you're saying. I understand the point you're making, but I don't think nature will be fine. Nature will be altered, maybe very badly, and I will use the word bad. It's altered in a way that it has to recover from, and it'll recover. I understand all that, and I agree with that there too.
It doesn't need us, we need it.
Oh, much more than, yeah.
It's
It can shake us off. I've heard it said, the earth can shake us off like a load of bad fleas maybe, or something like that, and go on. But anyways, John, let's get one more comment from John, and then what I'm trying to do is maybe get more of a group-directed thing, and so if we could then, after John's talk, then we can maybe move into kind of a circle, and I'd like to talk about some of the ethics and have people have some thoughts about what this means, and how important is it to save the Cahansi spray toad as compared to, having electrical power through to poor people in this area. So, John?
I just wanted to mention, must have been the last 6 months or 9 months that they've come up with a method to easily alter genes. And now this has become a big ethical. I mean, it's simple in the error rate, it's like 1 in trillions, and they can do it. So this whole question comes out, are they going to alter the genes of humans? I mean, they could go in and say, yeah, we want everyone to be white male, blue eyes, blonde hair. And the problem is, if everyone's that, then you're susceptible to disease because you only have to attack one gene though and wipe things out. But there's this whole ethics thing, since it's so simple, it's like the genie's out of the bottle. It's not like we're going to restrict it to just scientists in the lab. I mean, just about anyone in the world now.
Yeah.
It's going to be able to make these modifications.
It's amazing when I was reading the passionate discussions of people that think it's just our necessity to bring back passenger pigeons. It's something humans have to do because we were so terrible about decimating them earlier, and we have to resurrect them. And other people just as passionately taking the opposite point of view, that happened and that's done, and now we have to go on and do other things. And what does it mean in terms of this whole discussion gives this whole concept to me of what does ecological planning mean? What does, and once you have some of these, like you say, a capacity to alter genes, then people can say all sorts of things about how to change the world, how to make it better, and I always worry about people that know how to make the world better.
Just a quick thing, the other issue, or one of the issues is, what's the linchpin? What's the linchpin for us? What animal out there, if it goes away, we go away, and no one knows. So you get rid of it, say, well, we don't need that, well, maybe you don't. It was, we found out with the butterflies, right? All of a sudden they started disappearing, we found out the milkweed was their linchpin.
Right.
Maybe pollinating bees are ours.
Right. What's our linchpin? So you gotta be careful what you eliminate. I'm amazed at all the effort to save this frog, but there's, like 5 or 10 species gone each day that we don't even know about.
Mm-hmm. It's a great book, The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert, and excellent book. And she travels around the world and she goes to places. She's talking. I mean, the big thing that we don't talk about much around here is the departure of the Great Barrier Reef and what's going on with there. The bleaching of the coral and the changes in the salinity of the water, the changes of the makeup, the composition of the water, and so on. So, but I'd like to get into this thing and talking about how things fit in. What is our responsibility in resurrecting animals or saving animals or ecology? I feel like the ethics of this whole aspect, I think, is what I want to have you have an opportunity to talk with each other about. So if we take like 2 minutes and just pull extra chairs out of the way and try to get into a circle. Thank you so much. It was an interesting topic. At this dam, and when they were interviewed, they're saying, you know, they wish the guy that actually picked up the first discovered toad, he says he wished he'd never seen it. You know, how do you value this toad in 5 acres of land, and how can you value it as compared to the costs it took? And you know, we're humans, we're on here, maybe the world will shake us off like a bunch of fleas at some point, but while we're here, we still have to live on the land, and there's people, you know, in these areas that aren't taking as much of the resources as we are. And you know, what we've done, we maybe had the benefit in the U.S. of building our dams and doing our work when some of these rules weren't in effect. So my question is, you know, thinking of the cost, it puts the cost to do the snail darter in the U.S. to just pennies compared to what this was. The amount of effort to try to save this Kahansi toad, and people that work there think, you know, been better off just to take all that money and build a 4th turbine and, you know, use all the water and get more power for the people there.
Who's putting up the money to do all this efforts to save?
Efforts to save? Well, you know, Tanzania and other countries, we've signed an accord, right, that says that we'll try to protect the world's ecological systems. You know, and so the World Bank gets involved, governments get involved.
I think it would have been a much different question if this would have been a successful conservation effort. As it's a failed conservation effort, that puts a different spin on it, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Gene?
That money that was spent would not have gone to helping the people of Tanzania if those projects had been canceled. That same money would have been available to the people of Tanzania.
Could have been more electricity or...
In other words, it's a false choice, you're saying, what this man working there at the gorge says. If they would have just taken that money and put it into a 4th turbine, everyone would be a lot better off.
But that money was already earmarked for conservation.
Yeah, when it's transferred.
The World Bank wouldn't have funded probably the turbine.
Yeah,
I think it's kind of futile to try and maintain an environment. I mean, we've got global warming. You save these millions of dollars that save this one environment, but all of a sudden it gets warmer and they're gone.
yeah.
Or some invasion, another species moves into their territory because theirs isn't livable anymore. So trying to spend, you know, billions of dollars to try and maintain an environment for a particular species, I think in the near future seems futile.
Yes.
Except for our species.
Yeah.
I mean, the way I see it, the current trend, you know, we're going to wipe out every species that we don't need. We're going to have cows, pigs, chickens for meat. We're going to have plants to eat, and everything else is going to end up in a zoo. You want to see an elephant or a zebra or a giraffe, you're going to have to go to the zoo because we don't need them as a species to exist. And our current trend, that's what we're doing. We're going to wipe out everything. And the bottom line is, the more people we put on Earth, the worse things are going to get. That's the bottom line.
We might need them indirectly, and we don't know.
Well, that's the thing. We're going to wipe them out, and then we'll find out that we do need them when it's too late.
Yeah, overpopulation is the background issue of so
That's a
many
whole
of these
problem.
issues. Global warming, energy usage, waste, recycling, all these things. Because you have 7 billion people, that you wouldn't have this problem with 1 billion or 2 billion people, or at least not at the scale. And when you have 7 billion people, a bunch of them are Wall Street bankers who need to make a 15% return on all their investments, and so they find ways to build dams in remote countries, and then they milk the whole population. Now the thing is fresh water. I think there's going to be some other talk about this, but you know, you're going into parts of the world where they use lakes and rivers, and then Nestle's and other companies are say, no, we own this now, you have to pay us for the water that you've always just been using. And it all comes back to overpopulation, with a layer of greed on top.
Yeah.
Well, it's industrialization as well.
There was a study I read, I mean, it's very hypothetical, but they did a study, they say that the Earth can sustain about 2 billion people long term, and that's it. Everything above that, it's gonna end up bad. And we're already at 7, so imagine.
But we're using a lot more resources in this country. I think you careful not to apply our standards today to those people in their country. At some point, you have to have some way that they can make intelligent decisions on what they save and not save. Because by sitting here and going home, you know, and turning on the TV and having a great dinner tonight is a lot different than the way those people live. So I can't really apply my standards if they're dying, you know, with infant mortality rates that are huge. How can I apply my standards?
We also can't take the moral high ground in this species conservation, because if you look at our history, we wiped out the entire western United States. The buffaloes, the indigenous population, we just wiped out. We thought nothing of it. We didn't have awareness at the time as much as we do now. We don't know how many species we destroyed, how many tribes we destroyed, and that's why the rest of the world looks at us as hypocrites. You know, we polluted like crazy for hundreds of years, and now we're saying you can't do that, that's not right. We've got it, but you can't have it, so that's part of the problem.
Except if they've got it too, it only increases the rate at which the planet is being killed by us, and increases the chances of our demise, and shortens the overall life expectancy of this particular species, which is probably a good thing for the planet. So I think we should get to 9 billion, maybe 10 billion people, and we can wipe us out probably by 2200. Let the planet return to normal. It sounds like a reasonable goal.
Start over again.
I mean, how many extinctions have there been, right? There's been, what, 6 big ones before this one?
This is the sixth.
And every single time, the planet has recovered wonderfully. Just new species. I mean, the dinosaurs are gone, except of course for the birds. But it keeps coming back. Life is ubiquitous. Once it occurs, once the cell exists, it goes on forever. It can't be beaten. But us? Like all of the species, the last 1 million years at most, we're gone.
Yeah, I mean, when you look in an evolutionary framework, the life of primates on Earth is nothing. Nothing
Look
compared
at all
to
primates. We go back about, what, 400 years? So it's a pretty good span. But if you look at a species, a typical species is what? 250,000 to 500,000 years is a good run. So,
It's amazing when you think of the span of dinosaurs, the time that they were extinct.
but if you look at an individual species within that group, you still find it's you know, a really long life, not lived up in years, a long life species. But also like 100,000, 200,000 years, and then there's a new kind, new variety, and the old variety's gone. Okay.
But we can think this through and plan it, Joanna. That's our capacity, you know, and that should make us be able to live 5 times as long as any other species by bringing our power to this, our scientific
Kill 5
capacity.
billion people and start all over. That's the big plan.
I don't know if I like
Other
it.
than that, there's no plan that works.
We're gonna draw straws?
Extinctions take about 30 or 40,000 years, which is like beyond our ability to think that far out. We can't think out a decade.
There's interesting discussions.
Brains of Donald Trump leading the Republic.
I don't think so. They can change that. I thought I was reading that, like, I think in the 6th extinction by Colbert, she says something like, it is, an extinction of some species occurs like once every 100, 150 years or something like that. It's not a common thing.
In nature.
In nature, right. You know, but that's hard to say because what again is a species? That's you know, when you think of the numbers of amphibians that are dying out now with this fungus and different things that are going on, you know, and that's somewhat spread by humankind's capacity to take whatever is in one region and put it everywhere else. You're not only getting salad from Argentina and things like that, you're also getting their funguses and their, all the different diseases and things that come in along it, right in for the ride. The little spiders from there and everything else that come in from that.
I want to get back a little bit to I know we're having some fun with the flipping, well, so what if humans die off, but if we have to think about, you're talking about should we do this, should we do that? Well, for whose benefit? Is it for us in the first world, or is it for people in the third world, or is it for people 10-year time frame, or is it a million-year time frame? And I'm thinking, I kind of like people because one of the things that we can do is we have the potential of establishing colonies off the planet. Because someday, life on Earth is going to get wiped out. It's going to happen, either by an impact or by the sun or something's going to happen. And right now, we are the ones, humans are the ones with the most likely possibility of surviving that. Because we have the capacity of building a space station or something, or colonize other planets, which other animals don't. So we're kind of on a race towards long-term survivability. And right now, believe it or not, I think we are the best chance of really, really long-term survivability.
But wouldn't life on another planet, I mean, there's some technical obstacles, obviously, but if we move to, say, Mars, and we're the only life form on Mars, are we going to bring cows and pigs and bacteria and a whole ecosystem there? And Mars would be, with less atmosphere, more vulnerable to any sort of meteor strike or whatever than we are here. I mean, every time there's been an extinction, it hasn't been a complete extinction of life. It's been a lot of species, but some species, the dinosaurs are gone, and now the little mice and the, other mammals and stuff start to have room to grow. But we don't you think we would be able to manage that type of catastrophe here better, where there's breathable oxygen in the air, than to go to someplace like Mars, the moon, or wherever, with a very limited gene pool of a few hundred people that could involve in this kind of spacecraft with the cost involved, and then you have the risks that you have of radiation exposure because the atmosphere, they don't have the magnetic bands that we have around the Earth that protect us from the cosmic rays and so forth. That seems less likely to me than fixing something here to try and build something in another planet. I mean, maybe I'm just having a limited imagination, but I'm not seeing it.
Oh, no, I would agree with you in that we don't have a good choice. We've been looking out now for what, 4 or 5 million light years, and so far we haven't found a planet like ours. There's all sorts of planets out there, there's big ones and small ones and all sorts of, but we need a rocky planet with lots of water and oxygen and all those other kinds of things. We haven't found anything. So the idea is, although the hypothesis is wonderful, I think the practicality is very limited. We need to find a place, and some way of getting there. You talk about 5 light years. That's a really long way. How do you get there? If your maximum speed is 100,000 miles an hour, and you're what, 150, 200 years? How many generations of humans are going to be space men, not Earth men? And what adaptations will we have for that particular environment? And then when we hit gravity, how do you walk? We've had a guy up there just under here. Comes down, lands, does not walk. He's beginning to get around now, isn't he? But boy, we didn't have any
problems on the Martian walking.
Didn't have any problems. So,
This
great idea.
This presentation shows us with that Hawaiian bird, is that the Star Trek transporters is probably not ever going to work. You're going to take those atoms apart and reassemble, they won't be the same.
Yeah.
It's, that's how Jim Crow got split. And that's how it also put them back together.
Mike, you positioned this whole thing as an ethical discussion, and it's interesting that we really got off of that. We're really into the pragmatic thing about how do we survive. Because ethic implies good and bad according to some standard. Okay, but we're not even thinking about that.
We're talking about
But pragmatic says, where should we have our ethical discussion? do we want to have an ethical discussion about space travel? Or do we want to have an ethical discussion about how we manage population growth? I think the pragmatic part will help steer us to a more productive ethical discussion where it makes sense to have an ethical discussion and where it's kind of a pipe dream.
But the ethics we've started with was, should we save a species that occupies 5 acres? Right? Can we explore that? Is that worth doing and why?
But we've also started with the assumption, the ethical assumption that human survival is paramount.
Yeah, do people agree with that? Do we agree?
That's kind of the way the discussion's going to be going.
Personally, no, it is, I mean, it's a ethical question without an answer, but I think that doesn't make it not worth discussing. The topic, you know, I tried to pick, and I didn't have to pick the Hansi spray toad, but it seemed to encapsulate something that would keep a discussion focused on something. If you have the capacity to do things, should you do it? You know, if you have the capacity to increase the power and so on, should you do that based on other fallacies? And humanity is always flawed in what they do. They sent a graduate student out and he showed pictures to people in the community of these animals. Have you seen these animals? There was nothing that was any kind of analysis to say before they decide to build the dam, what do we do? How do we make this, you know, how do we do what we need to do? And even if they found this thing, there's definitely a group of people that say, the spray toad is an interesting thing. You know, I tried to bring some of its quirks out to life to make it an interesting creature that has these evolutionary adaptations. But on the other hand,
But the process for them deciding, since it's their country, could be different than how we decide in our country. So if they've got a lot of people dying from disease and other stuff, just like I think the person who found it said he's sorry he found it because he could see he started this mess that maybe he even felt the resources dedicated to trying to say that far exceeded the benefit of that. And so and it is a cost benefit.
And that was his ethical decision.
It's his, right.
well, something like that worries me. I don't like that. I don't like that they do that. But then you start looking at this whole the resurrection science. Because we can resurrect the passenger pigeon, because we can do this, put all these resources in to do this. Yeah,
How many frogs voted for that dam?
What's that?
How many frogs voted for that dam?
Yeah.
Were they bold?
How many toads? Yeah.
So in terms of resurrection and bringing back the species, I can see real problems with that because no species lives in isolation. So we bring back one species. What does that do to the plants? What does that do to the predator-prey cycle? I think we could end up saving one species but causing a whole lot of problems. So it's a dangerous thing to mess with.
Yeah.
You said we're working on an assumption. The whole thing started talking, working on the assumption that the people living in this particular area needed power.
Right.
Do they?
Who put that?
So you need power?
And should they be living there?
Should you be
Would
living here?
it be, I don't have to be living here. I can pack up and move. Could they pack them up and move them someplace where there's power and leave this stuff undeveloped?
Power is for the whole country, not just for a little district.
And are there all these sources of power?
Well, back,
That's my point that I'm thinking about. We're talking about, well, it's their country, they should be able to make decisions. But whose country is it, really? When you start saying, well, it's their country, you've got probably 74 different tribes that may feel that it's their country and that they should be in charge.
And when the next dictator comes along, it's their country.
That's right, exactly. Or are we saying the country doesn't belong to any particular tribe or dictator or nationality? The world is like the Antarctic, it belongs to everybody. And we have to treat it as such, rather than say, well, we'll give, because I imagine there are certain parts of sub-Saharan Africa where the people would love to hunt the rhinoceros, and they have so much rhinoceros horn stockpile now, that they are hunting the rhinoceros to extinction, because that will guarantee them a standard of living that they don't have now. So that they would say if it's their country and they should be able to make the decisions about it, fine, let's get the rhinoceros extinct. It'll benefit them economically.
This week.
And if they don't agree, we should go forward. I don't know if they want to do what you want them to do, what do you do about it?
Who did put that dam there? Was it the people of Tanzania who said, hey, let's get together and pool our resources and build ourselves a dam for our use? Or was it some Western conglomerate that said, hey, we'll put a dam there and we'll find a way to
We have power, so we have power to
extract resources?
Yeah, these people aren't living in the proper way, and the proper way is
We'll
to
tell them how to live.
yeah, we'll tell you how to live. You should live in larger villages, and you should have, community center, and all this takes energy.
And they'll pay us back for the energy that they never knew they needed
In the first place.
in the first place.
But on a bigger scale, anything we do, we're talking about the particulars about this one incident, and if this one got cleared up, anything we do is going to affect the environment. And we're going to have to come back to the ethical or the bigger decision that got everyone's attention, like, this is for our survival. It went from, oh, the poor little frog, to wait, this is about our survival. I changed my mind.
Right.
But really, if anything we do has this effect, then how do we judge? How far can we stretch the system, the world, before we break it? Because we know we're going to stretch it and change it somehow to some degree. But we don't know the answer, so then how careful and what approach do we be and how careful we are? Some people, I believe, when they see animals, they think that should we bring the animal back, as if the animals say, thanks for bringing us back, we missed being here, and they personalize the animal. Some people think of it that way, some people think of it, what does it mean in the whole scope of things to us, long term?
Yeah,
Before
we
bring
think of
all
change
species
people.
back, we should stop killing off existing species.
Yeah.
It seems like that'd be a better priority.
Well, the other thing, if you kill off their environment, how can you bring them back? You bring them back where they're gonna live.
Right.
So,
A couple levels of ethics that I think we probably ought to be thinking about. We've been talking about saving the species or saving the planet. Well, if we want to reduce world population, one of the things we could do is ignore the people who are having a really tough time and are struggling now to simply survive. But our ethics, I hope, don't allow that to happen. I mean, we are trying to deal with refugees. We are trying to deal with people who don't have enough food. That's at one level. Another level, we're talking about, let's reduce the population. Now, the ethics comes in trying to weigh the two and come up with the modes of operation, for any given situation.
Sometimes I think that there's this biblical emphasis on life and the sanctity of life. The Bible says, spread your seed around, and that was for clans, groups of people living in small areas, and your band would be more able to overwhelm another band if you had more males generally in it, So it would be bad to not, take care of your children and so on. It was a benefit to have a larger tribe to overwhelm other people, but we're still living in the biblical realm of looking at how to populate the world and go out and dominate the world instead of having the capacity to look at it ethically and scientifically and say, we should try to make room for as many plants and animal species that are important to us as possible and try to make a world that doesn't overpopulate with people and kill us all.
That's sort of the root cause. I mean, you look at, you're right, how you deal with things today, what's the industry use, but the issue, I think, is the core, the root issue is overpopulation. No matter what we say, if the populations increase, people are going to try to survive. That's what they try to do, and then you're going to end up hunting animals to extinction or taking up new environments. So you kind of have to work hard on the root cause while you're trying to solve the day-to-day issues. And that's why we're having this discussion, because there aren't easy answers.
Every person that's born is a new consumer. That's the bottom line right now. As our society, as a capitalist society, that's what it is. Some of the guys don't want TVs, don't want a car, don't want power, everything else.
You're keeping this in America, or are you saying worldwide?
Worldwide, because there's a global economy going on. So, as I see it, what we should do is, which is impossible almost, is reduce the population by reducing the birth rate, not by killing everybody off. In the negative form, the negative birth rate, the negative birth rate, so that more people die of natural causes than are born, until you get a stable population, which can be calculated easily based on the resources, and focus the economy on raising the standard of living of those who are, of people, instead of getting more consumers. Because that's going to affect the whole capitalist society.
But that's exactly what China tried to do, right? China set one-child policy for quite a while.
And they're backing off.
And they're backing off on it now.
But then you have Europe and Russia, where it was considered as first world country, population stabilized and decreased. They get a lot of old people and not enough young people.
In nature, populations do stabilize. I mean, if you look at the growth rate of a bacteria, you would conclude that bacteria should have taken over the earth billions of years ago, but they don't. They reach a steady state and they stop growing because they get to a point where resources are limited. And you're already seeing it in many parts of the world.
Are you comparing us to bacteria?
All nature.
That's a slam against some bacteria. Well, this could go on in so many ways. It's been a fascinating talk. I recommend the book, the Sixth Extinction book, and also this book by M.R. O'Connor, Resurrection Science. Available at the library as soon as I turn it back in. But amazing concepts. That whole frozen zoo thing, and when you hear, she pretty well represents what people's passionate arguments are. Like, these people in here that have this, can be convinced that anything but saving the passenger pigeon and bringing them back, is something that's a moral imperative for us, and other people seeing it in a whole different way too. So she does a good job of bringing some of the passions of it to life. There's all those animals that I put up on the screen, the Florida panther she talks about in here, what they've done. They also, and I didn't bring it up, the right whale, whales in the ocean, and what's going on with them, and their change in habitat for them and species. I just heard there were a whole bunch of sperm whales that came ashore in the Baltic or something like that, and they autopsied them, and they were just filled, their guts were filled with plastic, and just died this probably horrendous death by ingesting all this. That all they can do is open their mouths and take in what they can take in, and then pass it through. And
It's in the microbeads that have been banned, actually.
yeah. Well, they were talking about large pieces of plastic and stuff, but I do, the microbeads are.
Bacteria microbe was recently discovered in Japan that can eat synthetic plastic. So that may be one of the best pieces of news for humanity.
On the other hand, as soon as it eats all the plastic, then it starts coming for our arms. I mean, it is the unintended consequences that we were talking about earlier. You think you have a solution to something, and how many times animals were put on to Australia. Bunnies and so on are brought to Australia. They completely changed the climate, and all the marsupial animals that were potential competitors to them all died out. A marsupial wolf lived until the early 1900s in Tasmania. Yeah, right. Yeah.
The Tasmanian tiger, what they call it.
There was a tiger too. There was a wolf and a tiger, and they both marsupial. Yeah, it should be amazing to see, I think. Anyways, thanks so much. I had a nice time reading and talking about this, and appreciate the discussion we had.